Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar on Conjoint Analysis 101. Before I start talking about the underlying mathematical models and things like that when it comes to conjoint analysis, let me start off with some basic things. Today the webinar is hosted on Livestorm. Livestorm is a chat-based webinar program. In the lower right corner, you can see the chat in the questions section. During today's webinar, if at any time you want some additional information on something, or if you have any questions, please feel free to write it in the chat or in the questions box. There's not really a big difference. Questions can be upvoted, I believe. So feel free to use that at any time. I have it open on my second screen, so I'll always be notified if there's any questions. So let me personally get the chat rolling. So there we go. So the webinar today takes roughly between 40 and 60 minutes, depending on how many questions there are and things like that. And without further ado, I will then switch to sharing my screen. And let me go over here. And let's start like this. Increasing screen real estate. So today's webinar is about Conjoint Analysis 101, and we're going to look at conjoint analysis using two different examples. One is fairly obvious, that's in this case yogurt, and the other one is more technology-based. So before I start telling you a little bit about what is conjoint analysis and how does it work, I first want to tell you a little bit about Conjointly, as well as an introduction of myself. And then I'm going to go into the nitty-gritty of what is conjoint analysis, what are levels, what are attributes, how does pricing work, how do you select sample size, preference shares, etc. Then we're going to use a case study and also have a closer look at the results from that case study. At the end, as I mentioned, at the end there's a Q&A session, but if you have any questions beforehand, please feel free to just pop them in either the chat or in the question section in the lower right. Okay, so a little short introduction about Conjointly. Conjointly is a software and research platform that has various easy-to-use advanced analytical tools, as well as expert support. So today I'm talking about our namesake, conjoint analysis, but we have a lot of different types. Just to show you a few, here's a list. We also do things like claims testing, BPTO, Gabor-Granger, Van Wessenberg price sensitivity meter, monadic block testing, and we even have a DIY experimental design where you can basically mix and match different designs types into one. So for example, merging a generic conjoint with a Gabor-Granger and a monadic block, something like that. So typically, we're speaking at Conjointly, we work via two routes. We have automated solutions. This is when you have unrestricted access to our software platform, and you can think of any type of design that you would like to create to answer any research questions you might have for any department in your company. Then you can simply gather participants. We offer a solution for that. We either do the BYO, so the bring your own respondents. That's either via shareable link or QR code. But we also offer predefined panels or even make custom panels, depending on your wishes. Then we also have the custom route. In the custom route, we basically hold your hand from A to Z. We first get in touch with you. We figure out which type of research requests you have. Then we set up the research design, collect the samples and the data, and then we create a decision-ready report. Most of the time in Excel and PowerPoint, but other formats are also available. One thing I do always like to put a little bit of focus on is our expert support. As we have colleagues all around the globe, from the east of New Zealand to the west coast of the US, and myself stuck in between in the Netherlands, expert support is always readily available. Then a little bit of information about myself before I start with the main topic of today. My name is Stijn Mensel. I'm a lecturer for quantitative market research here at Conjointly. Before I started working on the corporate side of things, I worked in academia for the better part of a decade, where I taught a lot of different courses on research methodology, stats, behavioral psychology, and also did a lot of research into things like talent development in sports, and even as old to the influence of Pokemon Go on sedentary lifestyle behaviors. So the underlying thematic here is I like numbers and I like research methodologies, and that's also the theme for today. So without further ado, let's start talking about the main topic for today. So what is conjoint analysis? Well, simply speaking, conjoint analysis is breaking down a product into attributes and levels. Then what we do with these attributes and levels is we make different types of combinations that we show to respondents and see which one do they prefer the most. So basically, we break down a product into two different types of components, create different combinations using these attributes and levels, and then figure out what is the preference that a respondent has. So if you think about a product, in this case, a smartphone, the main attributes would be the brand, the screen size, the color, the price, but this can also be the operating system, the amount of cameras you have, and whatnot. Then if we look at the levels, these are typically the second tier if the attributes are the first tier. The levels are basically the value that each attribute can take or can have. So for brands, we have things like iPhone, Samsung, Sony, Xiaomi, and 20 years ago, you probably had a Nokia. Screen size the same, color, every color of the color wheel, price can be any price that you want to test, etc. So we have a product, we break that down into the first tier, which we call attributes, and then we break down the attribute into different levels. That's basically the general design for conjoint analysis. Of course, there's a few more steps along the way, but let's first have a little bit closer look at some specific elements when it comes to attributes and levels. So as I mentioned, attributes are basically the dimensions of a product. So these are the things that you would label, and these are the things that you highlight on the back of the box. So things like price, color, shape, size, location, brand, etc. One important thing whenever you do a conjoint analysis is to include as many attributes as you believe are important for your study design. So include everything that you believe would sway a customer to choose either your brand or also a competitor. Also often include your competitor's benefits as well. The reason we ask you to include everything that you believe is important is that we more accurately can basically replicate a real-life consumer decision. And that is the main goal of Conjoint, is basically to figure out what a respondent would choose if shown various options. Typically speaking, we limit the list of attributes to roughly 7. You can still do a conjoint analysis in case you have more, but then typically speaking, we would divide that into, for example, saying never show a respondent more than 5 attributes at the same time. Because if you have 8 or 9 or 10 attributes, what most of the time happens is people stop reading the list after a while and just go, okay, I'll look at these 3 elements. Whereas we really want them to engage with all the information we show to them. One thing a lot of people forget, an attribute can be as simple as binary. So it can be something like yes or no, or present or absent. Think of an SD card slot. This is something that some smartphones have and some don't, or what is it, a recent trend from the last year, if the charger is included in the box. So could be charger included or not included. Yeah, so an attribute can be as simple as binary. And some things that we've seen people try to add as attributes are things like consumption occasion and consumer characteristics. These are not really product attributes. These are more either purchase information or consumer characteristics. You can still filter based on this. Typically speaking, we would add this as open-ended questions. For example, in which situation would you buy a new smartphone? And then probably the most common answer is when my contract runs out, or something like Black Friday or my birthday or something like that. Consumer characteristics, you can also simply split on if you ask questions like what's your age, what type of employment do you have, etc. So what I want to do today to make it a little bit more lively is add a few questions for you. So in the lower right, you'll see the poll section. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the first question of today. There's going to be 3 questions. And the first question of today relates to attributes. And the first question is, which of the following features is not an attribute for a smartphone? Is that the operating system the smartphone uses, the megapixels of the selfie camera, the SD card slot, or the time of purchase? And as you can imagine, this is an easy question. Believe me, they get more divisive closer to the end, but I always like starting with a simple one. So I see there's a few answers that have come in, and so far everybody that has answered got it completely correct. It's indeed time of purchase. This could be something that you want to know. For example, companies like Zalando and About You, so these are online ordering clothing companies, they notice that a lot of their purchases are in the evening when somebody's bored on their smartphone just looking at new shoes to order. So it can be relevant information, but it's not an attribute for a product. Then let's look at the other side of the spectrum. So let's look at the levels. So levels, as I mentioned, these are the values that each attribute can take on. So if we're thinking about colors, any color of the color wheel. If we're thinking about brands, it could be any brand on the market or a new brand. One important thing is you need at least 2 levels per attribute. Otherwise, simply put, it's a product description. So in this case, if we think about the SD card slot, if none of the options that you're showing have an SD card slot, there's no additional information when you add this. So that's why we typically say that you need at least 2 levels per attribute so that there is a choice option there. Otherwise, just write it in the descriptive elements. For example, please note that none of these smartphones come with an SD card slot. And the second point is that levels should be precise. And what I mean with that is they have to include all the vital information to make an as clear a decision as you wish to make. So if we're thinking about an engine, you don't want to know, well, it probably fits 4, maybe it fits 5, I'm not sure. Or the engine size, it's somewhere between 1.5 and 2 liters. This has an impact on a lot of things. This has an impact on the torque of the car. This has an impact on your efficiency of the car, and a lot of other things. So make levels specific so that they basically the consumer has the most accurate information so that they can make a real life decision. That also leads to the third point. They should sound realistic. Don't introduce claims or attributes that do not sound realistic to consumers. And then finally, we want it to be a decision between A and B and not a little bit of A with a little bit of B. And that's what we mean with making levels mutually exclusive. If we think about something like a tissue paper, 2 features or 2 levels that are often mentioned are things like recyclable or weave-like, but don't have them be in the same option. So typically speaking, what we say is name one attribute texture, have it weave-like or simple, and then the other attribute being recyclable or non-recyclable. Right? That way you gain more information and you get clearer insight into each attribute and each level choice. So now for the second question, let me already put that up. There we go. So the second question for today relates to levels. And so which of the following levels does not fit to a conjoint analysis for smartphones? Is that a 40 megapixel ultra wide camera, 500 gigs of cloud storage, free cloud storage, or a 1 to 2 day battery life? Okay, I'm seeing a few different answers. This is exactly what I was hoping for. So I would, in this case, be the annoying teacher and say there's 2 answers that I would consider correct, which, to be honest, means you got a 50% chance, which is quite nice from any teacher. In this case, I would say the most incorrect is 1 to 2 day battery life. So that's the one that fits the least. The reason for that is when it comes to smartphones, we typically have a specific term for that called milliampere. Just think about the way you use your smartphone or your kids or your parents do. And the amount of screen on time you use your phone with might be very different. So for my parents personally, a 1 to 2 day battery life is incredibly short because they barely use it. For me personally, that would be quite a stretch. So it's not specific enough that it gives vital information. And you also think 1 to 2 days, that's a 100% difference. That's quite a lot. Then the other one I would argue that's also mainly incorrect or partially incorrect is free cloud storage. So that's already information, but ideally add on top of that. So add free cloud storage using Google Drive or using Dropbox or using a specific feature or the amount of space that the free cloud storage would be or for how long is it, etc. So those are the typical answers. Then let's have a look at what we do with these attributes and levels. And again, if something is going fast or you want a little bit of additional information, just pop your question right in the chat or in the question section. So what do we do with a conjoint analysis? Well, basically we create a various amount of choice options. And the way we do that is, as I mentioned, we combine the attributes and levels together and create what are known as choice sets. So these are different combinations shown together in one set. And then we ask you, which of these do you prefer most? So in this case, one of our respondents would see the choice: an iPhone in 5 inches in silver for $1,200, a Samsung in 6 inches in turquoise for $1,100, or a Sony 5.5 inches white for $1,000. Yeah, so these are the 3 combinations they would see in one choice set. And we ask them, which one would you choose? Typically speaking, for most products, we would add none of the above option because we don't want to force them to make a decision in case this is a product they might not actually be interested in. One other element, we sometimes get the question, should I include price? My answer is typically always yes. And the reason I would always recommend including price is because it makes research comparable. As in, let's say you do a study now and then in 6 months, price is typically the common feature that transfers very easily from time period to time period. In addition, if you include price, we can do a cool few mathematical things. We can calculate things like marginal willingness to pay, and we can also calculate, for example, price elasticity of demand. 2 things I'll talk more in depth about later on. But so typically speaking, if price is any type of metric for your product, and most of the time that is, let's say 99% of the times that is, always include price. So we don't just show a person one of these choice sets, we show them quite a few. Typically somewhere between 10 and 14. That's basically the average attention span of an adult human being. If you can, of course, go higher than 14, let's say to 20 or even 30. We can build in safeguards that the question quality or the response quality stays high till the end, but that's something that you should then put focus on. For example, having a timer that says you can only answer after 5 seconds or something. So we show them a bunch of questions, and what happens then is we gain information about what a respondent's like. So here we see a picture, let's call this person Bob, and we know the preferences that Bob has. And we don't just do this for Bob, but typically speaking, a conjoint analysis is done with at least 100 individuals. So we have a very clear indication of what our sample, and with a sample size of 100, I would argue close enough to population, what a population really likes. So that's the beauty of conjoint. Now I just want to show you what it kind of looks like when you set something like this up, and then I'll talk about the underlying mathematics of it. So let's first look at how does it look when you set up an experiment. So I'm going to switch to our website. And just a little plug here, in case anything like this is going too fast for you and you want to look at it in a shorter bite-sized manner, you can always just go to Tools and then Generic Conjoint. Instead of a 40 to 60-minute webinar, we here have a built-in video, and some of these pictures will start to look familiar by the end of today's webinar. In case you have any questions that you did not get answered during today's webinar, but again, please put them in the chat or in the question section. Just use the chat with us function. We're available around the clock, so always just have a look. And then what I would recommend to do after this webinar is just simply sign up for a free account. It comes with quite a few example experiments, for quite a few different conjoints as well. So if you want to look at a generic conjoint, we have that about phone covers, and I think also mobile phone plans. Yes, indeed. But I want to talk about something different today. So we talked about smartphones, and to quote John Cleese, let's look at something completely different. Let's look at probiotic yogurts. And so this conjoint analysis is about strawberry flavored probiotic yogurts. And if we scroll down, we can see the attributes and we can see the levels. So brand is a typical attribute. You can also have things like price and feature. And in this case, for the brand, I have 2 different brands that I'm testing. That's Granny's Mix and Orange Fox. The reason I choose these simple logos is because there's no chance I'll get a copyright claim for using a logo that's too close to something in existence. Then the main tongue twister of today, the probiotic content claims. These are features. And in this case, there are bifidobacteria plus lactobacilli, bifidobacteria sentium, lactobacilli auroris, and healthy gut bacteria. You can give them all different packaging or what the claim would look like on your packaging, etc. Again, For simplification reasons, I use the same picture here, but you can change that in any way you want. And then I also have other things like pack type, so glass, plastic, and wood, if it's eco-friendly or not, so if there's an eco claim on it or not, the pack size, different price points, etc. Now I'd like to ask you to write in the chat any attribute or level that would convince you to buy a probiotic strawberry flavored yogurt. And to show you how easy that works, all I have to do is click on Add Attribute. And please just write anything that would make you go, okay, that's the probiotic yogurt I want to buy in the shop. So let me open the chat section. So what is something, when you're in the shop, you look at a label and you go, that's a content claim or that's a feature I'm willing to buy this product for. Bio, yeah, very good one. No sugar added, another good one. So let's say I add a bio. Typically speaking, what I would just say, a bio or no bio, non-bio, doesn't matter. Because what I'm going to do here is, in case it's non-bio, it's not even going to show it, simply because that's something you wouldn't put on your package. You wouldn't write, oh, this is not biological. Then sugar content, I think, is a very good one. I'm not that familiar with the sugar content in probiotic yogurt, but let's say 0 grams and 5 grams, and then maybe 10 grams, something like that. And what you see while I'm writing this is it's actually updating the amount of respondents needed. So let's add 20 grams, for example. You can see it's automatically adjusting the sample size to basically fit to all these things that are added. The way that works, I'll talk about a little bit. It's basically an effect size estimation. So it uses power. And we can see I haven't added enough to really influence the respondent amount yet. The one thing you can always do is simply choose a pretty picture that you'd like, or choose participants. As I mentioned, we got bring your own, predefined panels, or custom elements. If you ever want to have a look at what that looks like, simply click preview. It takes a few seconds to load. Let's be honest, probably a minute. And then you can have a look at what the respondents would see and what's the question type like. So I'm going to let this load a little bit for a second. And I'll tell you a little bit about how the sample size is calculated. It's already loaded, so let's just jump in. You can load it in various languages. We do predetermined translations. I would recommend going over them once, but we have a large variety of different languages available. My Russian isn't that great, so I'm going to stick with English. And so here we can see, we start with a disclaimer, a rough time estimation, and some simple information. And in this case, I can choose between Orange Fox with the probiotic claim Lactobacillus aureus in glass, 200 grams for 190. It is bio with no sugar. That's really nice. Then we have Granny Mix, Bifidobacteria centium, plastic, but it is eco, 180 for 190 with 5 grams of sugar. Then we have Orange Fox, Bifidobacteria centium, wood, eco, 200 grams, 250 bio, 100 grams. Now, in this case, I probably would be swayed because this is 0 sugar and it's bio, and I prefer glass over wood probably. So that would be my way of thinking. Then I click that and I get a new choice set immediately, and I can look, okay, this is glass, eco, it's bio, no sugar. I'm already feeling this choice a lot. This one, not really, also because the price is even higher, and this one is even more expensive and it's not eco with a lot of sugar. So this one, and let's say I want to know additional information. I can also add that in there, for example, gender, age, whatever. And in case I don't like anything, I simply click none of the above. So that's as simple as a conjoint analysis works. And you can see you guys gave me a few suggestions. I added them and they immediately show. And you can make this as fancy as you want, and you can play around with the labels and your logos, etc. So there's a lot of different ways to use a generic conjoint. So how do we calculate the sample size? For those that have had statistics in high school, uni, or just like playing with numbers, we use a power analysis for that. A power analysis consists of 4 components. We have a power, we have an error rate, which is basically the margin of error we allow, typically called alpha. Then we have the sample size, and we have an effect size. Now, for those that are not interested in that, Don't worry, our platform does it automatically for you, so you immediately know what is the recommended sample size for my type of design. Some things that influence the sample size are how many attributes and levels do you have. The reason that has an influence is because if you have more attributes and levels, we can make more different combinations that we want to test with respondents. The more combinations we want to test, the bigger the sample size is. Now, there is a few ways to reduce the sample size. Typically speaking, if instead of showing somebody, for example, a dozen choice sets, we show them 20, well, the combinations are still getting answered, so your respondent rate goes down, so you need a smaller sample size. Same for a number of alternatives. In the example I showed, there were 3 options. You can also make that 5 options, 7 options, etc. Typically speaking, I would stick around 5 options because otherwise some people might not be looking at the last few. But one thing I want to highlight is the underlying mathematical model that we create doesn't really care that much about the amount of respondents. It cares about the amount of observations or choice sets that are filled in. Now, I'll put a small asterisk here as a statistician because respondents are very interesting to look at because we treat them as an individual level, which in this case means that we can actually make a personal profile for each respondent. And that's always interesting to look at. So as a rule of thumb, the more complex you make something, the bigger your sample size need. Think of things like, I only want to have respondents that meet A, B, and C, or show question types A if they say they're male, show question types B if they're female, something like that. And the more complicated you make your conjoint, the bigger your sample size requirement. So what happens when somebody fills in all those questions? Well, I showed you a small picture before of Bob. Let's look at what Bob answered. So in this case, Bob, his first choice set showed him an iPhone 6 inches in white for $1,000, a Sony 5.5 inches turquoise for $1,100, and a Samsung 5 inches in silver for $1,200, as well as the option to opt out, and none of the above. In this case, Bob chose the iPhone. For the second choice set, he chose none of the above. For the third choice set, he chose a Samsung, another Samsung, and then an iPhone. Now, what we do with that information is we simply convert it into numerical information. For any type of math, we need numbers. So what we do is we transform those answers into an estimate preference table, which we can see here on the right side. Now, this might look complicated. To be honest, I want to argue that it's relatively simple because the first column simply shows the choice sets. So this is choice set 1, choice set 2, so that's that one, choice set 3, this one, choice set 4, and choice set 5. And we have every alternative. So in this case, this is the iPhone 6 inches in white. This is what he chose, so we just fill a 1 in there. That means he did not opt out. Now we get to probably the most complicated element of this chart. Because he has a 0 for Samsung and a 0 for Sony, the only logical answer is that he picked an iPhone. The way that works is the reason we don't show iPhone here is because let's say you have 20 different attributes. That table will probably not be that easy to look at. So what we do is we try to reduce how wide the table becomes. So in this case, because you didn't pick Sony and you didn't pick Samsung, they have to have chosen iPhone, law of exclusion. So in this case, it's an iPhone, 6 inches. He did not choose turquoise or silver, the exact same logic, therefore he must have chosen white. And he picked one that's $1,000. So that is basically how that works. And the second one, he opted out. So all you have to fill in is opt out. Everything else can be 0 because it's all irrelevant. For the third one, he chose a Samsung 6 inches. So we can see there's a 1 for Samsung. It was turquoise and the price and the size. So that's the way that table works. Again, our platform does this for you in case you want us to do it. That is no problem whatsoever. However, sometimes it's interesting to look at what is the underlying math. Let's say if you open up the hood. So what we do with these numbers is we use something that's called a regression. Now I'm going to show you an example using a multiple linear regression. So we'll get a few things called coefficients. That's not the methodology we use. Typically speaking, a conjoint analysis uses something that's called a hierarchical based logistic regression. If this is something you want to know more about, just pop it in the chat or ask me in the QA section, because that requires a bit more detail and explanation. But that's what we use underlining. So it's called the hierarchical Bayes hierarchical Bayes logistic regression, and to a degree it's multilinear as well, or hierarchical. What's the difference between green and yellow? Good question. In this case, the reason we have green and yellow is green is the highest value and yellow is the middle value, I believe, the middle or lowest. And in this case, we see green is the highest value and light green is the middle value, and yellow is simply the lowest value. That's one of those options in Excel where you can just say, please show each value relating to each other in colors. Yeah. A good question though. So let me show you what we get from a regression. And this, for those that are afraid of numbers, this is the scariest that it gets today. So here we see a bunch of coefficients. And of course, I wouldn't be an annoying stats teacher if I did not ask you a few questions about numbers, or specifically speaking, one question about numbers. So in the poll section, I put up a new poll. And based on these coefficients, I want you to figure out which of the following statements is true. Does Bob prefer Sony phones? Does Bob prefer to opt out? Does Bob prefer expensive phones? And does Bob prefer larger phones? So this is the last question and therefore also the most difficult one. So let me give you a few seconds to answer this, or maybe a minute. Okay, I'm seeing a split. That's always nice. Okay, so we have a little bit of a split between larger phones and expensive phones. Let me reveal the correct answer. In this case, it's larger phones. I'll go through the coefficients to give you a bit of an idea. So we see, and I also have it here as text, we see that he has a negative value for opt-out, meaning that's something he does not typically choose. So that's why he has a negative coefficient. He has a negative value for Sony and a negative value for Samsung. Therefore, his preference must be iPhone. Yeah? That's typically the baseline. So in this case, iPhone would get a value of 0. For size, this is a positive value, meaning he typically prefers a larger phone. Yeah? In this case, it means that if we fill in Bob's information, typically speaking, for Bob, we will go to a bit larger phone. Then he likes turquoise and he does not like silver. Again, in this case, white has a baseline level of 0, so he prefers turquoise the most. And for price, this is a negative value, so this is the reverse logic as the size. In this case, Bob would always prefer a cheaper phone. In this case, I would argue that Bob is probably Dutch because he prefers a large phone and he's cheap just like me. So that could be one of the impacting factors. So what we do with that underlying mathematical model, and again, this is a simplistic version of what we do in reality, is we can actually calculate quite a few interesting things. So what we first do is we calculate utility scores, and using utility scores, we transform that into a few metrics that we can do various analyses with. Let me just show you a short list. We can look at attribute importance. So that's basically answering which of the attributes does the average consumer find the most important? Which of the levels are they most interested in of each attribute? Then whenever you include price, we can calculate two very cool metrics. The first one is willingness to pay. Willingness to pay is basically information about how much is the average consumer willing to pay to go from feature A to feature B. And I'll show you that in more detail when we look at the probiotic yogurt. Then we have price elasticity of demand. What this answers is what happens to the quantity demanded, or the market share that I would get, if I change my price. So what happens if I increase or decrease my price to my market share or the quantity demanded by consumers? Then, as I mentioned, we can also segment the results based off of specific open-ended questions. As you saw in the example, there was, for example, gender question. We can also add other questions like, in the case of smartphones, are you looking to buy a smartphone within the next 3 months, 6 months, or year, and see if there's a difference in preference there, etc. And then finally, one that I always like to highlight is our market share simulator, which shows roughly what percentage of the market you would get if these are the offerings on the market. So a little bit more information on the latter. So what a preference share simulator does, it creates a hypothetical product profile. And in this case, in the picture, we can see, basically, we want to answer what happens if I show a white iPhone, 5 inches, it's in white, for 1100, a silver iPhone, 5 inches for 1050, a Samsung in white, 5.5 inches for 1220, and a Samsung turquoise, 5.5 inches for 1120. And we can see that this would be the preference share distribution. So the main choice in this case would be a Samsung phone. Now you can play around, adjust the price, adjust the color, adjust the screen size, etc. And that's the beauty of that simulator. So what the simulator does is, instead of me asking, for example, Bob to make choices, we've trained a mathematical model, and we basically ask the mathematical model, what would Bob choose if we show him these various options? So what you can actually do is you can even add attributes or levels to things that were originally not even tested. So let's say you only tested an iPhone between 5 and 6 inches, but you tested other phones at 4.5. You can look at what would happen if I create, for example, an iPhone Super Mini. So there's a lot of ways to play around with that, and I'll show you that in a little bit in a live performance as well. So let's have a closer look at probiotic yogurt. So I will switch back. So this was the question type we had. And then what we do is we run the study. You can do that very easily. Just do save, prepare, and launch. Make sure you predetermine which participants you want, etc. And then once you launch the experiment, we start gathering respondents. And here we can see that we have 60 respondents roughly. And if we want to look at the settings again, we can see I was testing Granny's Mix versus Orange Fox and different claims for probiotic content. So in this case, Bifidobacteria lactobacilli, Bifidobacteria santium, Lactobacilli auroris, and healthy gut bacteria, as well as a few others. Then all you have to do is click View Report. The first time you do that, it takes a few minutes. The reason for that is we're doing all the underlying mathematical equations at the same time, so that takes a second to run. Now, I always like starting with the overall feedback, especially looking at understandable and enjoyable, but mainly understandable. The reason for that is if a study is deemed understandable, most likely the responses are going to be as accurate as they can to real life. People understand the choices that they were shown. So then what I always do is I start looking at the Insights tab, and the first thing we'll see is that price and pack type were the most important. Now, if you're ever wondering, what does this graph show? Just look at the bottom. In blue, we always have a short description. So in this case, this graph shows how important is each attribute relative to the other attributes across consumers. So in this case, this adds up to 100%. And we can see that price and pack type have the biggest importance, and volume and eco have the least importance. If you want to know basically margins of error and things like that, you just click confidence intervals. These are based off of 90% confidence intervals. We can see that price and pack type are very close to each other, but that they, for example, vary significantly different from volume and eco. So that's how you get some information. If you ever think, well, I want to export one of these pretty pictures, simply click Quick Export. You can get it as a CSV, XLSX, or a general picture, or simply click Add to Export when you're making your whole data set. The next one we'll look at is preference for levels. This is the relative preference for the average consumer. So what's on the left-hand side is equal in numeric-wise to the right-hand side. So here we see Granny's Mix is slightly preferred over Orange Fox. In this case, the most popular probiotic content claim is healthy gut bacteria, followed by Bifidobacteria centium. The least preferred is Lactobacillus aureus. The price distribution that we often get, the cheapest price is the most preferred compared to the highest price. That is a very common distribution to find. We can see that glass bottle is preferred over wood or plastic. Interestingly enough, this study was also conducted roughly a year ago, and then actually plastic was, I think, maybe even the most preferred. So that's why I typically recommend Performer Conjoint from time to time, just to see also how the market is developed. A slightly bigger volume is preferred, not that big a difference though, and the eco label is also slightly preferred versus no eco claim. Now we get to the interesting stuff that comes with money. So marginal willingness to pay. Marginal willingness to pay indicates what is the average consumer willing to pay to go from feature A to feature B. Now in this case, feature A is Granny's Mix. So the average consumer, if they would go from Granny's Mix to Orange Fox, they would expect a 41-cent decrease in price. Okay? That would convey them to switch to Orange Fox, so to speak. So if you want the description, it's below here as well. So it's the indicative amount of money consumers are willing to pay for a particular feature on average. So it's not what one specific person, it's for the average person. Then for the probiotic content claims, I don't like the way this graph looks. It's a bit difficult to interpret. So let's say I want to make Bifidobacteria centium the baseline. All I do is I click on it. It takes a few seconds, and voila, I have a new baseline. So compared to Bifidobacteria centium, so the average person is willing to pay 29 cents extra for the content claim Bifidobacteria plus Lactobacilli, and 23 cents more for healthy gut bacteria. Compared to glass, people are willing to pay, the average person is willing to pay 20 cents less for plastic, 11 cents less for wood. This is quite interesting that people are willing to pay less for the larger volume. This is most likely due to these very small differences we also saw for the preferences. So in this case, if I'm the company making the probiotic yogurts, I would probably stick to 180 grams because there's not really a benefit to go to 200 grams unless that's, for example, cheaper in the long run, although that might be difficult to manage. Then for the eco label, it's interesting to see that the average person sees basically the removal of the eco label being met with a 20 cents price decrease. So in case it costs more than 26 cents to create your eco label for every package, think of all the regulations and the things you have to do to get an eco label. In this case, it might not make sense to add an eco label. Then for those that want to just look at which combination set was most popular, you look at the ranked list. And if you want to look at some statistical information, I know I always do, you can look at the R-square factor. In this case, we use McFadden's. And this basically gives you information about how well does our model fit to the data we collected. Okay? But that's more for those that are interested in these statistics side of things. Then I mentioned I like preference share simulations. Let's have a short look at that. So here we see the preference share distribution in a very specific situation. Now in orange, we have Orange Fox, logically speaking. And in blue, we have Granny's Mix. Then red is none of the above. And in this case, what I'm testing is Granny's Mix with the content claim Bifidobacteria centium for $2.50, a wooden pack, 200 grams, and no eco claim. And then for Orange Fox, I have the same claim, wooden pack, etc. Now, what the beauty of this simulator is, using that underlying mathematical formula, I can play around with this. So let's say Orange Fox might want to go to $3. And they heard that, so my company, in this case, Orange Fox, they see that glass bottle is the most interesting. Volume didn't really impact it. And they're going to actually go for an eco claim because it's not that expensive to create. And they realize healthy gut bacteria is the most important. And so remember, originally Granny Mix was the most preferred. Let's see what happens if Orange Fox changes their product in a certain way. And that is the beauty. Now what it's doing, it's basically filling all this information into the mathematical model. And we can see that Orange Fox gets a lot closer to Granny's Mix already. And then we can play around. And so in this case, well, it's still a high price. Maybe they figure out, no, we can actually price it at 250. Oh, 250. And we recalculate. And then we simply have a look at what the results are then. And this is with me manually changing it. Let's say I want to check a few different options. All I have to do is add a concept here, and I can add any type of combination that I'm interested in. So in this case, we can see if Orange Fox knows how to reduce their price to 250, they would have the largest market share. Now, this is a lot of manual clicking. Let's say I want to know all the different prices for Orange Fox. All I have to do is click the FX button and then click recalculate. What it now does, it looks at what happens to the preference share if I launch Orange Fox at 190, 250, 315, or 415, as well as all price points in between. And as I showed you before, that is basically relating to price elasticity of demand. So what happens to the preference share if I change the pricing? So it's taking a second to load. I think I might even have it open here. Yep, there we have it. So these are the price points tested. If this graph is a bit confusing for you, you can simply hide your competitors, for example, simply click on them. And in this case, let's also hide none of the above. We can see that for Granny's Mix, if they increase their price from $1.90 to $4, their preference share would decrease from 52.3% to 38.4%. However, that might actually be a viable option in case the profit that they get from this is more than the preference share drop. In case you want to know what is the price elasticity of demand, it's right here in the corner, and it even comes with a handy description. So in this case, we can see that price elasticity of demand is inelastic, meaning when they increase the price by a certain percentage, there's a smaller than that decrease in quantity demanded or in preference share. You can also calculate this for 2 points. Simply click on 2 points, and voila, it calculates it for you. In case, instead of looking at revenue, which we have here on the right-hand side, you want to look at something like profit, you can simply add a calculation for that. So in this case, I would, for example, call it profit projection. This is based on 1,000 units being offered. And what I could do is, for example, I know that in this case, my product would cost 50 cents. I can simply add that. And you can also add things like marketing costs, shipping costs, etc. All of that can be added to the equation. And then you see that it changes the formula according to what you fill in. So an ideal playground, I would say. And one of the things we were also looking at was the probiotic content claims. So let's say I want to look at which of these content claims works best for Orange Fox. All I do is click on the FX, have it recalculated again, and then it's going to look at what happens if I have the Bifidobacteria lactobacilli, Bifidobacteria santium, Lactobacilli auroris, or healthy gut bacteria. And in this case, let's hide Granny's Mix again, not interested in the competitor. I can see that the most popular choice is Bifidobacteria santium, followed by healthy gut bacteria. Now, for those that have a very, very good memory, this is actually quite interesting, because if we look at the inside tabs, what is the most preferred level? It was healthy gut bacteria, followed by Bifidobacteria santium. And what I really like about the simulator is it looks into separate groups. So in this case, it looks at people that prefer Orange Fox and actually figures out, no, that demographic or that sample segment prefers Bifidobacteria santium over healthy gut bacteria. Now that is what is so cool about the simulator. You can play around with different combinations, look at different groups, look at different segments, etc. And in case you want to differentiate even further, you go to the segment section. And here I can create a segment for how often do you buy yogurts for your own consumption. And I can pick any answer they give. For example, at least once a week, once in 2 weeks, or less frequent. Then all you have to do is click Add Segment. Oh, sorry. There we go. We have segment 1. And then we see View Segmented Results. And I start getting information about those segments. So there's a lot of different ways to play, and that's why I always call it the simulations or the playground section, whichever name you prefer. So that's what it looks like under the hood in the software platform. Now let me close off with a little bit more information about different types of conjoint, just to give you a completely well-rounded picture of everything related to generic conjoint. So today we look at what is known as a choice-based conjoint. This is where you pick one choice from the different combinations. Other options are rating-based conjoint. This is where you rate each conjoint from 1 to 5, or whichever numeric value you want. We have chip allocation. For chip allocation, we, for example, say, here are 100 chips, distribute them over your preferences. Then we have amount to purchase. This is mainly interesting when we're looking at something like soda cans or toilet paper. You can think that people might want to buy this in a 2, 4, 6, or 12 pack. Then we have the best worst conjoint. That's basically a conjoint analysis, but also looking at the least favorite choice. So basically we ask people, what is your favorite combination and what's your least favorite? And then ranking-based conjoint is putting them all in a ranked order. I saw that there's a question popping up. I'm curious to know, what is the analysis behind the segmentation? Basically, what it does is, in the mathematical model, we can basically adjust the model based off of which segment you choose, and then we rerun the analysis, and we segment the results based off of that. So as long as we know the information for the segmentation, so we can't make segments based off a question that wasn't asked, but if we have that information, basically what we do is we cut off those people, we create a mathematical model for them, and then we run that analysis and simulate based off of that. But a very good question, Shu. I hope that answers it. And otherwise, please feel free to just add to the question. So those are the different response types we have. And we also have different questioning approaches. The most typical one is the standard conjoint. This is where we basically pre-randomize which combinations we want to test, and we divide those over the respondents. So respondent Bob will get probably different choice sets than respondent Mary or respondent Chris. The reason for that is we just want to test a lot of different types of combinations or a lot of different choice sets in order to train that mathematical model. Then the alternative option that we have is known as an adaptive conjoint. What an adaptive conjoint does is, if we go back to the choices that Bob made, within the first 5 choices, Bob never picked Sony. What an adaptive conjoint would do is basically over time, it would no longer show him any Sony options. It would only focus on Samsung, iPhone, or none of the above. The reason for that, so there's one benefit to it. The benefit is you get a more precise picture of what does Bob like the most. However, this has a downside, because if you're Sony, you'll never figure out which combination would make Bob sway towards Sony. So there's pros and cons to having that type of design. Then we have 2 typical ones. Generic conjoint was the topic of today. We also have brand-specific conjoint, also known as alternative specific design conjoint. And what that is basically, it's the same as a generic conjoint, except some levels are limited to specific brands. So if we go back to smartphones, typically speaking, I would do that with a brand-specific conjoint for the very simple reason that operating system is brand-specific. You cannot have an Android phone or a Samsung phone that has Apple OS, and you cannot have an Apple phone that has Android. Maybe if you jailbreak. But typically speaking, the operating system is limited to the brand. The same to the charging port. iPhones have a Thunderbolt port, and Androids have a USB-C. So that's a situation in which you would use a brand-specific conjoint. Then finally, basically how many attributes you show per combination. You can do the full profile. This is basically showing all attributes in every single choice set. However, as I mentioned, sometimes you might have more than 7 attributes. So let's say in this example you have 12. Then it's a very good idea to basically say, show only 5 attributes at the same time. Okay? That means we have to make more combinations, so you'll need a bigger sample size, but it does mean you get a more accurate answer based off of the attributes you do show. So that's a lot of information about Conjoint in 55 minutes or less. Now what I want to do is I want to open the floor for some additional questions. So in case you have any questions, put them in the questions or in the chat section. For those that have to hurry on to a next meeting, I want to thank you all for joining today. If you want any additional information, either write to support@conjointly.com, use that chat function on the website I told you about today, or for example, look me up on LinkedIn or something like that. And in case you really like the slides and you would like to have a handout version of that, please just write it in the chat and I will send it to you immediately after today's webinar. So what I'll do now is I'll stop sharing my screen and have a look if there's any questions.